talk about you and your new album.
Great, very excited to do so.
I mean, most of you know Will as one half of Goldfrapp, but you have a long, rich history of in the music business before that, right? Before you joined.
Yeah, I was a kind of saxophone player, or trying to be, for quite a few years. When I left college, I was really hopeless at it, and I went to America for a bit, played in a lot of bands that would have, you know, a sort of fledgling sax player. And so I cut my teeth over there. I was in the Bay Area for about a year. And then when I came back, I was actually a bit better. Kind of had to be. And I got recruited by Tears for Fears in the mid-'80s to go on tour with them, did some playing with them, did 2 tours with them, played on 2 of their records, and had quite a good time in the mid-'80s doing that.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So that was good, you know, because knew what touring was all about, and also it was a kind of free fly-on-the-wall seat to see how the music business worked and how it could be done or not done, and it was very educational.
Great. And then you met Alison somehow or other.
Yes. Well, while I was on tour, and I was thinking about, you know, the whole thing of being a session musician. It's great, but you're relying on other people all the time to phone you up, and you know, you look at the phone accusingly, nothing happens. And I thought, wouldn't it be good to be the person who made the phone call? And maybe the way to do that would be to be a writer rather than a player. So actually, while on that tour, I was listening to a lot of music, thinking about writing, and I had a little keyboard that I was starting on. So by the time I got back, I was really trying to get into writing. And a few years later, I heard Alison, and I thought, that's it. You know, it seemed to be so in sync with all my kind of worst predilections, really. You know, to do with 60s film music, and somebody, a friend played me Alison doing this track. I think it was with Tricky. She did some stuff, and with this group called the Startled Insects in Bristol, and I sent her, you know, I wrote to her saying, how's it going? Are you busy? What would you fancy just coming over and trying out? And then that was it. You know, we started, and 3 tracks later, we met Daniel. And Alison played him our first 3 tracks, and we were off.
And yeah, an amazing canon of work, incredible work. And of course, Will was the producer, and was that fair? Is that be fair to say? I mean, you were the producer and the musical composer.
With Alison?
Yeah. How were the jobs divided?
I don't know. It must be different for everybody, don't you think? Every sort of team. And I think the easiest way to talk about it is that we just both did everything. Obviously, I didn't sing.
Right.
And I tended to stay away from the lyrics because Alison was brilliant at that. And but everything else was a kind of mutual decision. Sometimes I would need to sort of stay behind and look at what the hell we'd done in the day, because I knew that if we just started from where we'd left off, it would be, you know, hard going. So I needed to try and put something in order so that when we came back, Alison would feel like, oh yeah, we've moved on. Yeah, here we go. You know, then we can look at the next section or whatever it is. So I think it was a bit of everything, really. But I mean, Alison would be sitting there going, no, I think that needs to happen there, and you know, so it was a mutual thing.
But the sessions you did, I mean, when I say the sessions, the multi-tracks that you did were pretty complex. I remember there's a very well-known, very successful mixer, mix engineer, who mixed Black Cherry, said that it was the most complex mix he'd ever been confronted with, and I think he did quite a lot of head scratching to get it. Because you were constantly updating, weren't you? Always updating, sending new bits.
Oh yeah, version 10, version 11, version 12. And luckily you were there to go, yeah, but what about version 5? That was pretty good. I mean, we just right at the beginning of that hard disk period where you didn't need a 16-track or 24-track machine. You could just have as many as you wanted. And so everything you did then became potentially in the finished, there was no demo phase, in other words, you know, where you just kind of took off, and something that you did right at the beginning on day one could be there right at the end. But yeah, poor mix engineers. I remember someone looking at me going, labeling the desk, and he looked at me and he went, bass number 9? And I felt a bit guilty at that point.
And it has been a very successful project for all of us. So you know, and a pleasure to work on that.
Well, we were lucky to have you, I think.
Oh well. I know. So let's talk about the new record, your new record. Why Archimedes?
Yes, I've slightly forgotten. Well, obviously lockdown was this amazing period where I think a lot of great things happened because we were all forced to be on our own resources and we didn't have anybody calling us and interrupting us. So I had this sort of uninterrupted time because I really wanted to make a Moog record. You know, we'd had this Moog Ensemble going for quite a number of years. We'd done gigs. We just didn't have an album. So I thought, well, it's really time now to knuckle down and try and get something together. And so I started just coming up with improvs and trying to be led by the instruments, actually, because I've got all these synths, so I might as well try and make them do something. And after a bit, and after watching a lot of YouTube videos, I used to watch, I don't know if anybody else does this, but I listened to lectures to try and send me to sleep. And I found that the best ones were maths lectures because I could understand that they were in English, but that's about all I could understand. So pretty soon, you know, my mind would just detach from what was going on. But one of the things that came up was that they all, or lots of people who are these amazing maths gurus, thought Archimedes was the best mathematician of all time. And I just thought, well, yeah, okay, he did buoyancy and the screw, but what else did he do? So I got curious and did some research and was just amazed about this person who single-handedly, it's like this thing where somebody in history can just discover so many things that it actually moves the whole of civilization forward. And you just think that's an amazing thing to have done. And I think maths is one of those subjects where you can do that, you know, where you can uncover whether you're discovering or inventing, whatever you're doing. It's this grey area, isn't it? But things appear and suddenly, as of today, you know, there's this theorem and it wasn't there before and it will be true for the rest of time.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of momentous thing. So it seems a suitable subject. And I like the idea of celebrating people from around the world. You know, it doesn't have to be English people, British people all the time, you know what I mean? It's like, there is somebody who has influenced everybody.
Which of his inventions caught, any in particular that caught your imagination?
Well, I think, you know, he was the first person to think about pi as being a number. Before then, everyone had thought it's a ratio. It's the ratio between the diameter and the circumference. That's all you need to know. It's pi. And he was like, well, what is it? You know, what number is it? And so he devised this way of taking a circle and then dividing it into triangles. And you could work out very easily what the edge of each triangle was in terms of its ratio to its diameter. And then you just put more and more triangles in there until you've just got this forest of triangles, and you're getting very close to approximating the circumference. And he got this. I think it's something like 27 over 71 was a fraction that he came up with. But he came up with lots of fractions. So he actually got a number for pi. He was the first person in history to do that. So it's not I mean. I don't know why I get excited about things like that.
But there's also Heat Ray.
Heat Ray, yeah.
Which is the title of the album.
He discovered that he knew what a parabola was. And because he knew what a parabola was, he knew that it would focus, it had a focal point, which meant that you could then calculate the shape of the parabola to move your focal point, which meant that you could then take the heat of the sun and you could focus it on enemy ships, which is what he ended up doing. And apparently they would suddenly burst into flame. They were constantly under siege where he lived in Syracuse by the Romans. And so the Syracuse and the king was always going, oh, please, please, come up with another invention to stop this attack. And he'd be like, oh, I'm just busy, doing circles and things. Yeah. And they'd be saying, well, you live here, you don't want to save the city. So he had to come up with all these different inventions, and that was one of them.
I mean, that's an incredible invention, which until you told me about it before, I had no idea that was even possible, to blow up a ship basically with the sun.
I know, but similarly they had a lot of them in a line, I think, and then they worked it all out. But it was all because he had the maths to do it that they were able to. Did it actually work? Well, I think it did, because Marcellus, who was the Roman general, became utterly impressed with Archimedes, because every time he tried to attack, something would go wrong. Either his ships would start burning, or they had this thing called the claw, which would pick up ships and just sort of drop them back in and sink everybody. And in the end, the sailors were going, he would say, right, we're off today. And they would say, well, if we can see Archimedes on the battlements, we're not going. So I think we're pretty sure that he had an effect. And there's this thing called Greek fire, isn't there? I don't think anybody really knows what that is. But some sort of napalm that he might have invented. Anyway, we don't know.
So when was he active? What years? What period was he active?
Well, I think he was 270 BC. So he was in that 2 centuries BC, and it meant that he went to university in Alexandria, and we think that his supervisor was Euclid. Okay. So he comes from quite a good stock.
Euclidean rhythms.
Yeah.
That we all love. Yes. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the ensemble. And how did that start? When and how did you come to start that?
Well, I've always been a fan of that Switched On Bach record, and I heard it again after coming across it when I was about 11, but I heard it again in my 30s, and I thought, why has nobody tried to do this as an ensemble? Why is it just now we could do that? Obviously Wendy Carlos was just her and her synth, and she had to track herself up. But what's stopping a group of monosynths getting together and playing some of the pieces that she realised? And so after a few phone calls, we tried it out, and we tried out one of the pieces on that Switched On Bach record, the Brandenburg No. 3, and we just read through it, and we just looked at each other and went, it sounds like Wendy Carlos. It's amazing. And that was, and then we got a commission to do a piece for a Bath festival, and then ever since then, once in a blue moon, somebody will have heard of us and phones up and says, would you like to do a gig? And everyone's busy. Everyone's, amazing musicians in their own particular field. None of them were really synth players, maybe one or two. And now they all are, which is really exciting. And at the time, I just gave out all my slightly quirky, slightly broken synths for them to use. And now they've all bought their own. So that for me is like a success to me.
And what's the core? Who's the core member? Who are the core members of the ensemble? Because there's some that obviously you bring some in when you need them, but there's some who are more like the core members. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, some of them people I've known for absolute years, like Adrian Utley. First met him in Bristol in the 80s, and he got me a couple of synths early on, and he's kind of rekindled my interest. There's another wonderful. Well, Graham Fitkin, who's a composer, and his partner Ruth, who's an amazing harpist. Simon Harum is a genius saxophone player and is very cross that he's having to play synth all the time. But he does it on a wind synth now, so he's a bit less cross. And who else? There's Ross Hughes, who's a kind of poly musician, plays all kinds of instruments. And Eddie Parker, I was at university with and roped him in, who's a flute player, famously was the flute player, writer in Loose Tubes. And I'm sure I'm going to leave people. Hazel Mills, who's a singer who's got her own career, very successful. And Hinako Omori has been playing with us recently. Yeah. And I love what she does. She's incredible sound person. So yeah.
But it could have been the ARP ensemble, or it could have been the Korg ensemble, or it could have been the Roland ensemble. I mean, I imagine why it was the Moog Ensemble, but because of Wendy Carlos. But is that why you chose? Was that your instrument?
Not really. I mean, all those instruments are in it actually,
Yeah,
so it's not a strict thing. I think it's a bit like, you know, vacuum cleaners were known as Hoovers, and I think synths were a bit known as Moogs.
Yeah.
You know, so I think it was more that. It was just a quick way of saying
Synthesizer.
yeah, but also mono synth, kind of old-fashioned and good.
Nice sound.
Nice sound.
Yeah, nice warm sound.
Exactly.
And you've done live performances as well. Do you have anything planned at the moment?
Yeah, we did what's on that record is the National Orchestra of Wales. We did a concert with them for Radio 3. It hasn't been broadcast yet. I dare say they're just confused as to what platform they'd put it on.
Yeah.
But it has this kind of live element to it already. It was done as a live concert. And we're doing it again at the Barbican on the 8th of October with Matt Parker, who I don't know if you know of him. He's this great guy, stand-up maths. He has a number file. He's on YouTube. And he's really good at explaining difficult maths to you and not making you feel stupid, but not talking down to you. And he's going to be doing intros. So he will explain much better than me, how he came across pi, how he came up with buoyancy theory, how he came up with the screw and the heat ray. So he's going to be there. So it'll be a bit like Peter and the Wolf. There'll be a sort of little chat, a bit of music, and then he will come on and explain the next thing. So hopefully it'll be interesting.
And listening to the album, I mean, a lot of it feels. I mean, I'm not a classical music expert by any stretch of the imagination. Some of it feels quite contemporary, kind of a little bit Michael Nyman-ish. Would I be correct? Did you play with Michael Nyman?
Yes, I did. Yeah, in the sax days.
Yeah, and some of it seems a bit more traditional. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how you found that balance? Because I think that balance is really good because it keeps you very interested in the sound.
Yeah, I mean that is the challenge, isn't it, with synths, is to try and keep you interested. But also, I wanted it to be. It feels like you can usually do almost anything, provided it doesn't go along for more than say 4 minutes. People will tend to put up with it.
Yeah.
And then if it's varied, they will also put up. But it's also I will put up with it. So I'm interested in trying all these different outfits out and musical costumes, and so. Like the law of the lever, I really wanted to play with, things on both, stupid things like, having pinging and ponging sounds on two speakers.
Spatial,
Yeah, you want to create some space and make it feel like you're on a big seesaw. And then with the legacy, I wanted to make it something quite serious and almost bombastic because it felt like this was him handing on all his ideas to future generations. And also I was thinking about triangles because I know geometry was his thing, so I just wanted to, the little theme at the end is always 3 notes. And so it feels like it's a collection of triangles that are superimposed on each other, So it's those kind of games. Nothing more complicated than that. I wasn't putting math formulas into a score and writing it out. I wasn't doing.
I was wondering if there was how much maths was involved in making the music.
Well, not enough, probably.
And did you study classical music?
I did. I was at York. I mean, in the early 80s.
Yeah.
And there was some far out people there. There were some really interesting. There was some really good ethnomusicologists there. There was someone who was very into serialism, and most importantly for me, there was a studio there.
Yeah.
So, and there was this wonderful guy called Trevor Wishart. I don't know if you come across him. He's done this piece called Redbird, which is all tape splicing. So there was a lot of influences going on, and I wasn't trying to be a classical inverted commas composer. I was just interested in all the rich variety of things that were going on.
And you can hear a lot of those influences in your music, in your Goldfrapp productions and all that. The kind of, I don't like to use the word particularly, but experimental techniques. I mean, every record is, every recording session is an experimental, whoever it is, from ABBA to to you, and because a lot of people, well, no, I say a few people who I've worked with who are classically trained, that kind of sends a bit of a red flag to me, because a lot of people who are classically trained in classical music find it very hard to break out of that kind of cage, that kind of it's got to be written, it's got to be, there's very little room for experimentation or trying things out. So, but obviously where you were trained or where you studied, it was a very different atmosphere.
I think it was, and I've always been interested in all music. I think that I think we're not very good in this country, maybe, at embracing all areas of music. It feels like if Brian Eno walked down one side of the street and Simon Rattle walked down the other, they wouldn't necessarily know who each other were.
Yeah.
And that seems a shame. And I remember seeing one of these award ceremonies in France where it was a music award ceremony, and they had Serge Gainsbourg and Pierre Boulez sitting next to each other. And I thought, that's it, that's great, isn't it?
Do something.
Yeah. And so I think I'm on that side of things. I think that, Ellington said there's only two types of music, good and bad music.
Yeah.
It's like that, really.
Agreed. Does anybody want to ask any questions?
Yeah, I got one. I never realised until recently, until I was coming to this, about your connection with Adrian Utley from Portishead.
Yeah.
Now you said that you've known him for so long. And interestingly, I find conceptually Portishead and Goldfrapp had certain similarities, but obviously very different style of music. But do you think, have you two ever influenced each other in your direction of work?
Well, I think so, yeah. I think so. Couldn't speak for him.
Right.
But I think we talk about, when we're together, we talk about music endlessly. And we both got him much more so a love of jazz. He's very knowledgeable about it. But also he's somebody that can sit down with a guitar and make a million different sounds. He can make it speak in so many different ways. So just to be near that is inspiring. And we made this rule on the first record, no guitars, which was a shame, actually, because but he would come and play, other synths for us on it.
I was quite happy about that, actually, to be honest.
Well, it was a shame in that, I suppose. Well, I think rules are made to be broken anyway, so I think it's quite good to have rules that you then kind of rub up against. Otherwise, it's just too open, isn't it? And I think that he's got a real sound thing. I think we're both into film music as well. And I think Portishead definitely felt like they had a kind of 60s noir kind of film soundtrack thing going on. I think that we started with that, but from a much more lush, 3D, colourful side of it, whereas they were much more minimalistic. And I think we were happy to put on colourful outfits and roam around in countries, in the nature.
And yes, that first video, which Alison Band, which was made by
Tillmans.
Wolfgang Tillmans, his first ever pop video, which was great, actually.
I think it's one of my favourite.
Yeah, but I think, and I don't blame Alison, but she decided that we should withdraw it.
Is it still withdrawn?
I don't know, actually. Good question.
Lovely hair.
Lovely head.
Yeah.
My favourite one, so I get really annoyed that it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
We'll work on it.
It's a great video, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is the thing with Alison, which whatever she does, she's interesting, I think. It's
Yes.
like a very magnetic person. And so, yeah.
And very strong visually as well.
Very strong visually.
Yeah, definitely. What did, sorry, any more questions?
What was your first synth and what's your favourite instrument at the moment?
Well, I did have a mini Moog early on when I was quite young, when I was about 21, and I just couldn't hang on to it because it was so expensive. and I needed a deposit for a flat or something, so I had to sell it. But I had it for a bit, and I absolutely loved it, you know. And so that was sad. But then, so I think probably then there was a DX7, which was probably more practical in terms of writing. And but so yeah, I was delighted when I finally got back to getting a mini Moog again. But I love the MS-20 as well. That was a big part of that first record we did with Alison. And I'm very fortunate to have a Oberheim 2 voice. I love that thing. It really makes a racket. You know, it's very expressive. You don't have to do much to it to sort of make it come to life.
I always found that the DX7 was very counterintuitive in terms of making electronic music. I never thought that anybody, well, no, that's not anybody, but most people were not making electronic music when they were using a DX7. It was just a convenient thing to have a few piano and bass sounds that didn't go out of tune and were quite reliable.
But this was it, wasn't it? It was, and everybody had that. I mean, if it hadn't been for that person who programmed the first one, I think it would have disappeared without trace.
Yeah.
But they managed to find this kind of genius guy to make all the sounds. But then, actually, to change anything in there was like you had to have a degree in math, you know, because it was just you had this tiny little window. Well, I'm sure you know, you probably tried it, and it took. Well, Brian Eno seemed to be the only person that mastered it.
Yeah.
But he just got rid of everything else and spent 2 years with it, and then he could make it sound brilliant. But and he understood how to work it, but it was a thick manual.
So what's next for the ensemble?
We've got these shows to do in October, so we're looking forward to that, and we've got some more in the new year. We're going to hope to get some summer festivals, maybe. We're going to just put it out there. You know, we've been awful. We just haven't really done it, and it's so great that Daniel's taken it on, because it's made me think, oh well, actually maybe this is worth kind of pursuing.
Well, it was ridiculous, really, that the ensemble had been together for so long and done quite a few concerts and compositions, and nothing had been recorded. I mean, nothing had been released anyway, and I thought that feels a bit odd to me.
Well, it definitely is odd, and I think the thing we're trying to avoid is being like a tribute band to Wendy Carlos and Vangelis and anyone else. We just want to be, which is why it was very important, I think, to make this record all original composition. Because I think we just think that you know, there's so much more to be had from these instruments that we're only scratching the surface.
Yeah. And I think the thing about everybody playing together by hand, so to speak, as opposed to programmed, gives it a really very unique kind of atmosphere and feeling, because it feels very human, even though it's all electronic. People go, oh, electronic music's not very. It really feels human and really well, and feels played, like you can feel it's played by humans rather than computers, which I think is fantastic and gives it a really special vibe. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, and I think the instruments are so flexible. When they go higher and lower than any acoustic instrument, and you can do things with them, and even the early minis had, you know, you could control them, you could sequence them and make them play in humanly fast things. So you can take them beyond what is humanly possible in so many ways, but then keep the human element there. And then I think you get this thing which hopefully will go on and on and on as a sort of, I mean, the violin's been going 400 years. They used to say that a mini won't be going for 400 years. Well, I'd like to think it would.
Yeah, great.
You spoke earlier about the visuals with Alison. Do you have any, other than the album artwork, do you have any visuals planned for this album?
Well, there's some little videos that are going to come out, which are Matt Parker explaining. We recorded him doing his explanations, and Anis managed to find these lovely little videos that go with those. So there'll be some more visuals like that. But yes, I want there to be more visuals. I think it would be... it's difficult, you know, when you do a concert, should you be having visuals with you? And I sometimes think that if you have too interesting stuff going on behind you, people just kind of lock into that, and they forget that they're listening to people playing music live.
And it's also very visual in itself.
Well, I think so.
No, it is. I mean, well, it is, yeah.
Well, it's quite
Yeah.
3D, isn't it? I think.
Do you think we'll ever put jazz into your music?
Jazz.
Well, it's just that you
Well, I like
to like it. You like it.
I like it, but
When
it's
Bowie
f-
came back right at the end of his life, and we started with it, I guess, to the extent he did right at the end, you know, make an album with jazz music.
well, I'm into the improvised side of it, very much so. I think Tangerine Dream were great pioneers with that, weren't they? And I think apparently they would just go into the studio without anything prepared and just start making a record. And I just think, well, that's wonderful, isn't it? I mean, and that has a kind of spirit of jazz to it. So I think spiritually, yes, but you know, doing chord sequences
Long solos.
and long solos, yeah, not too long.
Will Pickard in Space ever come back?
Oh, did you see that?
I did.
Oh, wonderful.
I did.
Well, we've tried to bring it back. You know, we did it as a kind of, you know, semi-stage thing. It'd be nice to do it as a stage thing.
Well, do you want to explain what it was?
Pickard in Space was an opera. I got very generously offered to write an opera by Charles Hazelwood, who at the time was running the BBC Concert Orchestra. And he said, what would you like to do? I'd like you to do a big scale composition. So I said, and I'd been in Austria and I'd come across this weird sort of monument that had been where Pickard had landed his balloon in the Alps in Austria. And so it was completely new to me. But apparently he was the first guy to get into space, really. And he designed this pressurized capsule and a balloon in 1932, and he went up into the stratosphere with it. And there were lots of adventures, you know, all went wrong. There were gas leaks. And when they came down, they couldn't get down to begin with, so they let out too much. Anyway, all those things that ballooning has issues with. And I thought, well, that would be a good subject. And he was famous in his day. Professor Calculus in Hergé's Project is based on Pickard. And of course, Jean-Luc Pickard in Star Trek is a tribute to him as well.
Okay.
And his grandson, Bertrand, is trying to fly around the world with a solar-powered aeroplane, you know, so it's kind of carries on.
Great. Any more questions? Well, I think Will is going to do some signing.
Be very happy to.
For those of you who have bought the record, which I hope is everybody. And yeah, so, well, thank you very much. It's been brilliant. And to learn a lot more about the ideas behind the record and your history and your incredibly articulate descriptions of science, which are, you know, much better than you think they are.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Will.
Oh, thank you.